It is evident from reading the profile we have of Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley that she is a woman of substance and ideas and unafraid of challenges. She has been in active politics since 1991, was elevated to Parliament in 1994, has spent decades serving country and Caribbean. She has held several important positions in Barbados politics and Barbados national life as leader of the opposition, and members of the opposition will tell you that is the most important job. But variously, she has been Minister of Education, Youth and Culture. She has also served as Minister for Economic Affairs. She has been the country's Attorney General, and of course, with a thumping win, is now the Prime Minister, the 8th person to hold that position in Barbados, and the first female to do so. I ask you, ladies and gentlemen, to please welcome our featured speaker this year, Prime Minister Mia Motley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. A national hero of Barbados, the Right Excellent Sir Garfield Sobers, Sir Wesley Hall, distinguished members all of the Queen's Park Club, but in particular, Mr. President, thank you for the invitation of allowing me to share a few thoughts with you. I learned at a very early age that however strong you may think you are, do not seek to contend with a full stomach. And therefore, I have learned to take my place, and I do so accordingly tonight before the meal and not after. But I have come to Port of Spain, to a place which really is the first place that I ever visited after birth. It's a place where I, for all intents and purposes, visited almost every year and grew up. And it's a place where, in spite of all, has come to represent for me that vibrancy and that spirit of what it is to be daring in the Caribbean. And I say so because tonight I've really come to talk to you about building legacy. And building legacy because without legacy we have nothing. I'm conscious that I sit at a table, having arrived on a plane this morning, with a person who, not me, but another one of your people has said is the greatest cricketer the world has ever seen. The Right Excellent Sir Garfield Sobers. I'm conscious equally that I sit at a table with another genius, a gem of a man, Sir Wesley Hall. I'm equally conscious that a gentleman called Derek Murray, who thinks he was introducing himself to me tonight, didn't know that when the first Cricket World Cup was being played in England, that I got myself in trouble with my primary school principal, along with two other persons, and we hid in a little alcove in her, because her school was on her residence, property. And we hid in an alcove for that match, and with a little transistor radio, made sure that no one could find us for as long as he chose to bat. And I had not yet reached the age of 10. And I say that because, in essence, there is no better representation of what building legacy is about. Equally, cricket, along with the University of the West Indies, still continue to be the beacons of regional integration, still continue to be the institutional beacons of regional integration. Because the real beacons of regional integration are each and every one of you who marry, who trade, who fet, who line, who do all kinds of things, good and bad, across borders. And I say good and bad because very often we want to only focus on one aspect and not the other. And the one thing that I learned because of cricket was how to deal with the good and the bad, and how to deal with building a legacy in dealing with that good and that bad. Back in 2005, when the region determined that it wanted to defy the odds and to host the third largest global sporting event across a number of islands unconnected by rail bridges, we determined that there was a fundamental challenge that unless we could overcome that would compromise the integrity, stability, and security of our nation states. How could we as open countries with open borders, have people moving freely and quickly between games, not interested in what our rules were per se, but interested in will they get to the game in time? Could they see the match in time? Could they enjoy the experience? And we were challenged, therefore, to create a virtual environment into which would fall that one experiment of oneness. And we succeeded. We created then, and I see John Messiah, who was at the center of it with me, the Joint Regional Communications Center as an offshoot of the Implementation Agency for Crime and Security. And the then Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Prime Minister Manning, asked me to lead the process to begin to pull together a single domestic space for 10 countries. Ironically, not all 10 were involved in cricket, but the few saw the benefit of being part of what they thought might have been a lasting experiment. And for those few months, not only did we create an institution that to this day, to tonight, is servicing not just the original 10 countries of the region, but is indeed servicing countries as far afield in the region as Haiti, checking on every single person coming into the Caribbean, and giving us the assurance, if we would ever dare to listen again, that they can secure our borders by communicating to us in a timely way where the risk to our stability and our security is in the facilitation of freedom of movement of our people. We also at that time created an opportunity that many of us, I think, long for again. That with a single wristband, we were able to walk through each other's borders without stopping, without being harassed, without being questioned. And while the first aspect of it remained as legacy for us today, regrettably, the second component does not. Now I've come to Port of Spain to reflect on this because every night that I turn on my television, or every morning, I see people who force me to turn my head away from the screen because my sensibilities cannot contemplate that mankind could treat mankind so in this world. I see people walking under the elements, moving up. They call it in a caravan. Nobody pausing to ask what it is they're walking from and why would they brave these elements if they were not walking from a past that for them is worse than a future could ever be. I see people in this region here, moving across in every direction from Venezuela. I see people moving into Europe, willing to take on the darkness of the night and the depth of the oceans, simply seeking a better life for themselves. And I ask myself, how do countries so come to isolate themselves from their own humanity that we forget that what ultimately this brief period of time that we spend on earth is about how we relate to each other, how we treat each other, and how we make each other's space more comfortable, and how we ask each other to work to allow people to sleep a little easier when the night comes. And these statements may seem strange coming from someone who is charged with the difficult and deep responsibility of leading a country now, especially one that is confronted financially and economically as ours is. But it can't be if we never forget why we are here. My government has set itself the very simple task that we must seek to achieve by 2030, a Barbados in which every child who reaches 18 should have been given a few opportunities. One, the opportunity to be able to be bilingual at least, and I don't mean Bajan and English as some Trinidadians might think. Get your meat out my rice. But English and Spanish, English and French, English and Portuguese, English and Mandarin, English and Dutch. Our ability to move, and anyone who doubted it this week saw it when I announced major changes to our corporation taxes, that we accept that our destiny is global even if our roots are Caribbean. That we accept that without engaging the world, we do not have the kind of future that we want to be able to sustain ourselves. We accept that we have to be able to move freely across this globe, never forgetting who we are as Barbadians or Caribbean people. That each child under the age of 18 must learn to swim. I say, why? Because the day you accept that you are limited by your physical capacity on an island is the day that you stop engaging the world. That each child must be exposed to an artistic discipline and to a sporting endeavor. Because there is no greater way of proving and allowing that nurturing of that child's humanity than being exposed to the arts, or the virtues of partnership than being exposed to sports. And I need not lecture anyone in Queen's Park Cricket Club about the virtues of team play in this hallowed hall. And finally, to those of you who like to make a dollar, that each child be exposed to the basic principles of entrepreneurship. Now, every one of us in this room would want to do that for our children. And if it is good enough for each of our children, then it must be necessary for the nation's children. But I want to add a little something to it, because coming back to the problems that we witness globally with migration and an inability to reach out to be our brothers and sisters' keeper, is a recognition that the greatest thing that could bedevil the Caribbean at this time is a return to xenophobia and nationalism. And if we are to fight it, then there is no better time than to expose our children to the kind of values and to the kind of human beings that we want them to become than when they are children and teenagers. Last week I went to Suriname, and I feel strongly that every Caribbean child ought to be given the chance to spend time in another Caribbean island to be able to understand what it is to be Caribbean. And I'm not talking necessarily about creating it in a way that adds significant amounts of expenditure that we don't have. I'm talking about literally allowing people to have experiences in a way that allows them to become tolerant and to appreciate the need for respect for difference. Because without that, when we come to discuss in these hallowed halls of CARICOM those things which ought to be bringing us together, we will always have difficulty if we don't appreciate that the common destiny, as Stalin said, as a Caribbean man and a Caribbean woman, is where we ought to be. I have seen this regional project stall, not because we don't know what to do, but because we have not felt passionate enough about why we must do it. And in a very real sense, we have it within us to be able to recreate that environment. Because when you understand that Caribbean community that has, from Bahamas in the north to Suriname and Guyana in the south, from Barbados in the east to Belize in the west, we have the ability to be able to chart our destiny and to be far more interdependent than we have been thus far. I feel strongly that we continue to circle around the issues, making sure that we never bring down the landing gear, such that we can land on the runway and bring true prosperity to ordinary Caribbean people. And what am I speaking about specifically? How do we fare migration when the region has Guyana in the south, the size of England, Scotland, and Wales, with a population of 750,000, and England, Scotland, and Wales with a population of 65 million people? How do we fare movement with a Suriname that is bigger than the Netherlands, but with a population of 580,000, with the Netherlands with the population of 17 million? As both leaders have had cause to say to me, they can take everybody in the Caribbean and still have room left back. Similarly, we in the rest of the region continue to ignore the necessity for virtual bridges. If we cannot build a bridge physically, an air bridge and a sea bridge and a virtual bridge with our phones become absolutely critical if we are to create the economic opportunities that will allow prosperity to come to our region. And yet, there is yet to be a summit on how we disentangle the very vexatious issue of air and maritime transport as we approach the third decade of the 21st century. It is almost as ridiculous as our failure to establish clear linkages outside of the North Atlantic zone, which we have traditionally traded with, without recognizing that the world did not begin or end in the North Atlantic, and that the messages that are being sent to us to engage the rest of the globe are as strong as they will ever be, and we will ignore them at our peril. Similarly, communication. We can't fight xenophobia, at the very least, if we don't communicate. But we still have not found a way, Julian and Josanne, to be able to create that bridge, that daily bridge. And I tire each time I say it. I tire. Because I know what happens in London, I know what happens in Iowa. I know what happens in Canada more than I know what happens in Port of Spain, Kingston, Kingstown, or Belmopan. It cannot be. And I therefore trust and pray that the encounter which we will have in Port of Spain in just over a week will come to be historic for setting a very clear framework for what we must at all costs achieve, not as governments, but as Caribbean people. And I say not as governments because Caribbean people are relying on us more than ever in this world of uncertainty. There is more that represents a century ago than we are comfortable in acknowledging. The rise of nationalism, the inward-looking nature of countries, the discrimination against people for things that are as basic as who they are, what they look like, and what their genetics are. And we in the Caribbean have had a story to tell that has emerged in glory in the last century. It is a story about how people have moved from the bowels of exploitation and poverty to be able to start to craft and become masters of their own fate. We have done it across race, across class, and across gender. Has it been a perfect experiment? Not yet. There are some people who still have not taken the train. And it is our duty to make sure that those who have not yet gotten on the train get on the train, rather than us putting the train out of business and shutting down and digging up the tracks, as is what others across the globe, and regrettably in this hemisphere too, would want us to do. Ours must remain a moral and credible voice for the preservation of humanity, for the preservation of diversity, for the preservation of tolerance. Ours must remain a voice that tells our story. And there's nobody who can tell a story better than a Caribbean person. There's nobody who can flavor it better. Ours must be a story that says that in spite of all, that we have exemplars of excellence who have shown the world that we are as good and oftentimes better than most others. But if we don't start to collate that story as one, and if we don't start to protect the gains of the past, and if we don't start to tell the rest of the world that it is still a valid story in spite of what others are doing elsewhere, then we run the risk of reversal, and we run the risk of destabilization, and we run the risk of having it be said that even those who manage the colonial exploitation of the region could facilitate greater movement of people and greater cooperation of the Caribbean as a group than when we took control of our own destiny. I don't believe that that is our future or our fate. And I hope that in Port of Spain, the voices will start to recognize that we have to build a legacy. And we have to maintain the legacy that is ours and that has been passed down to us by our founder leaders, who had to find the courage to confront power and to be able to build out of that a nation from scratch. In a sense, some may argue that their task was easier because they had the momentum and appetite and excitement of a population. Today we have the culture of contentment that threatens to ensure that the numbers willing to be nation builders are dwindling rather than expanding. It is our duty to change that around. In Medellin, in 1993, there were just under 7,000 murders a year. Today in Medellin, there are less than 400 murders. And with every murder, obviously, that is way too much. But the people of Medellin, business and otherwise, determined that they could craft their own future, as we must do in the Caribbean. We believe that it is okay for us to promote the virtues on television of basketball without recognizing that if we don't rescue cricket, we will not be the global exemplars of excellence again in this region. We speak about the genius of other pop stars without recognizing what we create here in the region. And it was only with the death and passing of your great mighty shadow that I went back to reflect a couple weekends ago on the genius of his writing. Poverty is hell. But nothing more riveting than you have a paycheck, you work somewhere, you go get horn. If we don't celebrate our own, tell me who is going to do it for us? And part and parcel about the duty of building a legacy is first and foremost for us to defend the gains of the past, but it is also to inculcate in our children and our young people what it is to be Caribbean, what it is about the Caribbean civilization that must be defended, not just the accent, not just the flair, not just the wine or the work up, but also the values that allow us to mix easily with each other and to turn our back on centuries of exploitation and discrimination and build a oneness and a civilization that has a valid message at the very time that the rest of the world is turning its back on unity. This is a world where isms and schisms and religious madness and migration threatens to go to levels that none of us even want to think about. But yet each day we see somebody else tempting fate and somebody else pushing to see how far they can go. Our voice is a credible voice, but we have to believe it, and then we have to use it. And I have come therefore to Queen's Park Cricket Club to say that one of the other examples is that we must make that change wherever we are located, or as I say to my government all the time, claim ground where you can and then move on. Claim ground where you can and then move on. Or to put it in cricketing terms, if it is Wes balling at you, he cannot ball every ball fast, and he cannot ball every over fast, and he certainly can't ball every over. So respect it, play out, and wait until the bad balls come and dispatch them with contempt, even if you want. But what we must do is claim ground where we can. And I feel strongly that we must first claim the ground that has been secured thus far, across generations, but within the particular region at this point in time when I speak about movement of people and migration, let us claim ground with what we've done with securing our borders. But let us move to the next level that will allow that freedom of movement and that capacity, particularly of our young children. Because if they grow and become adults with a sense of their own peculiar community or nation state being their reality rather than the wider region, then we will continue to perpetuate the bureaucratic bungling that pretends to be an exercise in regional integration and not realize that there will always be a reason why a country will want to object at quoted or COSHOD or heads of government. And that the only way we will get beyond that reason is not the logic of the individual argument, but it is the passion to achieve the journey of the oneness, because we know within ourselves that it is only if we work together, if we work as one, that we will become stronger, because we are always stronger working together. So my friends, there is much to be said about the cricketing metaphor of teamwork to inspire those of us who are in the region now. At the individual levels, the other example for us is to recognize that each of you can play that difference. I started tonight by telling you of the simple objective of us in Barbados to create an environment for our children when they become 18. If each of you takes the time, and in particular if this institution takes the time to nurture young men and young women, such that even in the absence of those support structures in their homes, they have a family in this club. They have a community in this club. They have a family in this region and a community in this region. Then I have every confidence that we will be able to see the turnarounds with respect to citizen security in our region, that we will be able to see higher levels of productivity and prosperity in our region. In Medellin, each business decided to give 2% voluntarily to being able to create social capital. If we don't do it when we can do it, when will you do it? And if as governments, we don't come to the realization fundamentally that government is about choice, just as much as your life is about choice. And it is the right choices that have to be made for the right reasons based on the right values that will always determine success. And that there is really not a lot of difference between the formal structures of government and institutions and the decisions that we make at an individual level. But that we have to come to the realization that we have simply to do it. So that I ask tonight, as we reflect and as we move forward, that the task is really not beyond us. It really isn't. I am sure that when a young boy went out, he played around Barbados in the Bayland and a couple other places. The police made him feel that he could be a policeman so that he could play with them. And that nobody could even begin to believe that that young boy would stand up and make those who taught us look like boys, and he looked like the master. And that that record could stand for as long as it has stood. Or in the case of Wendell, your own achievements. And today we can translate it and jump forward to Bolt, Usain Bolt. And we can jump forward to Rihanna. And we can ask ourselves, how many more Gary Sobers or Wendell Motleys or Rihannas or Usain Bolts are there out there? But who is giving them that chance? If we create that common platform for them to reach that age at 18 with those virtues, their world will be exciting and their future will be uplifting. For every young person that I see peddling with risky behavior who has potential, I say simply to their community and to their family, if Bolt did not have discipline, would he be Usain Bolt today? If the community did not nurture him and uplift him, would he be where he is today? Let us see in every other child that potential. And if we do it, I promise you that in our nation and in our region and in our civilization, we shall reach the stars. But more importantly, we shall reach it at a time when the rest of the world needs to hear our voice and our story more than ever, because that example of diversity and that example of oneness is the story that the world needs as we fight all of the negatives today. I pray that we understand that it can be told through cricket, through music, through simple engagement, through simple mentoring, through the church, through schools. But whatever is your medium, let us make sure that we play that role, recognizing that as governments, we can only be the best that we can be if we build a nation through raising a people. God bless Trinidad and God bless the Caribbean. God bless Barbados.